Hey Becky, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm live in Albuquerque today.
Oh, nice. How long are you going to be out there?
This is it. I'm headed out. I had a meeting with a bank yesterday and just some follow-up stuff. So I'm out here a little often since they're just voted for adult use. So
Recreational.
banks are talking about it. We've got some banks getting ready for it and some banks trying to, stay out of the space.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Actually, Aaron just joined us. Aaron just actually started a cannabis program in Michigan recently. So, hey, Aaron, how are you? Oh, I can't hear you. Can you hear Aaron, Becky? You're not muted, so that's strange, for sure. And we're waiting for one more person, so it's Edith Farrell. And once she's in, we'll get started, have a conversation, and let you be on your way. Okay. Aaron, we'll be here. All right. For those joining, thank you so much for joining. Wesley, Charlie, thank you for being here. I can't hear you, Aaron. All right. So we'll just wait just another minute. Once Aaron's back, we'll get started. Okay, Aaron, I see you again. We still can't hear you. Um, Interesting enough. Let's see. Can you try and speak now? No. Mm-mm. All right, I'll give you another minute or so, and then we can get started. We're waiting for one more panelist. Edith should be here any minute now. Get started. Thank you for joining us. I see some folks trickling in. All right. We're going to talk banking today, cannabis banking. Okay. All right. Well, Becky, let's just get started, you and me, and let's see if Aaron can get the audio working, and let's see if Edith can join us in a little bit. But first of all, I just want to get some introductions going. Hopefully, once Aaron is ready, we'll get him also wrapped into it. But for now, let's just start with you and me. So my name is Louis Masensi. I'm the co-founder of a company called touCanna. I'm a co-organizer for this event. It's a tech company in the cannabis space. I'm based out of Michigan, and I'm currently located in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And if Becky, could you give us a brief intro? Love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I'm Becky Poster. I'm with a company called HDCS, which stands for Higher Risk Deposit Compliance Solutions. And we are a consulting company, and I'm a co-founder of the company. And banks hire us to help them implement and monitor and report their cannabis banking program. And we help with everything that goes into that. And as Aaron knows, it's a lot of work. So we help take some burden off. We help with policies, procedures, risk assessment, vetting the actual cannabis customer, and with the monitoring and the reporting and what that should look like, and what boards are going to want to see, and what regulators are going to want to see. And so that's what we do.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Well, let me go ahead and ask you this first question. So, why would a bank refuse to allow cannabis businesses to bank with them?
Right. So banks generally, especially, and I'm going to speak to community banks and credit unions, because that's really who's banking the industry right now. Big banks can't and right now for several reasons. But so your community bank, their number one goal is community bank or credit union. Their number one goal is to service their community, and cannabis is there. So that's one option. And the reason why a lot of banks choose not to is because most banks in the United States, out of all the thousands of banks we have here, most banks and credit unions don't typically bank high risk customers, what regulators consider high risk for money laundering. So most banks stay out of that space. So and with that, cannabis right now is the number one highest risk client that a bank can bank. And so there's a lot of work that goes into that behind the scenes at a bank. So to take that challenge on, a lot is a heavy lift for a bank. And then the other huge reason why banks aren't doing it is because banks and credit unions are regulated by the federal government, and technically cannabis is federally illegal. It's still a Schedule I drug. So that's a huge legality. And so there is a bill that's been passed by the House several times. It's probably going to get its chance on the floor in the Senate this session. We'll see. But and what this bill is called the Safe Banking Act. And what this bill would do, if it were to pass, would protect those banks that are banking the cannabis industry, and put actual guidance, regulations written for banks. That's another reason why banks aren't doing it, because the regulations haven't been written, so they don't even really have the rules on how to do it correctly. So that's another reason why banks hire my company, is because we have a really good idea of what those are going to look like. And so we're getting banks set up now, so that when regulators are in their bank, and the regulators are in the bank, and they're passing the exams right now. And so we're getting them set up for that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Let's get a stab at another question here. So, being that cannabis is federally illegal, so do you think, let's say if I were a cannabis entrepreneur and I was trying to open a dispensary or a cultivation, how likely am I to get a loan from a bank, a traditional bank? Is it likely, unlikely, or impossible at this time?
Yeah. So as of today, it's highly unlikely to get a loan from a bank or credit union. Some are doing it. And typically, what we call the non plant touching or your tier two customers are primarily the ones benefiting from those loans. There's some obstacles that banks have to overcome to mitigate the fact that so when you get a loan at a bank, you're also signing over your collateral, whatever that is, and you can't do that with a cannabis license. A
Yeah.
bank can't come and take if they had to repossess, and that's how banks always look at loans, like, okay, worst case scenario, how do we get our money back? So a bank can't come in and take your flower. They can't come in and so that's the biggest obstacle right now banks are having. So if there were safe banking were to pass, there are some provisions in that protecting banks around the lending, and small business association loans, SBA loans would be possible. And that would be just a game changer for the industry to have a loan, even a high percent interest loan at a bank. We're still talking less than 10%, so
Yeah.
that's way better than what your average cannabis business owner is paying for their current loan. So it would be a game changer. And actually, I'm out of town. I'm visiting with one of my clients here, and we're working on a cannabis banking loan policy for them. They're wanting to do it, so we're working on it. We're advocates out there. We want banks to do it safely. Banks want to do it safely. They so they're entering into that space even before safe banking. So it's possible, but it's trying to find that needle in the haystack for the businesses. Who's doing it? Because most banks, don't have signs on their door or putting
Yeah.
commercials out that says, "Hey, we're a cannabis friendly bank." So finding those for the client is always a little bit difficult.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks a lot, Becky. And we have Aaron. I think I can hear you. We have Aaron and Edith.
Good. Yay. Hi, Aaron.
Hello, hello. Sorry for the delay, folks. My
No
apologies.
Hi,
problem.
Edith.
Excited to have both of you. Do you mind going ahead and giving us an introduction, excuse me, on who you are, where you work, and where you're located?
Go ahead, Edith.
You're muted. Yes, I can unmute you actually. Give me a quick second. No
I
problem. It's
determined
gonna work.
I determined that I
Please.
needed to switch browsers from Google to Edge, and that's what
Oh
allowed my
wow.
audio to work. So apologize for
Okay,
that.
well, no problem. Thank you for trying. Yeah. So yeah, let's go ahead and get you started, and we'll try to see if we can have Edith
Sure.
working in this. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Louis, for having. My name's Aaron Ambinder. I've been in banking and finance for the last 26 years. Several months ago, I took on an entirely new project. Cannabis banking is relatively new for just about everybody in the state of Michigan. And I was brought into a small bank out of Ann Arbor, Michigan called Bank Michigan. I'm the specialty banking director for the bank. And we actually went live with our program just 2 weeks ago. So it's been very exciting.
Well, that's awesome to hear. So from my understanding, we're now accepting cannabis businesses. So like a grow facility, a processing facility, or a dispensary can now bank with your bank at this time. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. And so the question I had asked Becky before was, why do you think so many banks are against banking cannabis? And what was the determining factor for your bank to actually opt into banking cannabis?
I heard a little bit of what Becky was saying, and I completely agree with her. Maybe just to add on to that, it is a Schedule One drug still, right? So that does limit, and I think what a lot of the larger banks are looking at. I was at Huntington Bank prior to coming to Bank Michigan. Huntington is a growing Midwest bank, actually one of the larger ones now, and what it comes down to them is the risk versus reward. Really is what it is, and
Yeah,
you know we see this tremendous growth, $38 billion industry potentially this year. In their eyes, because of the massive amounts of regulation and compliance. It just seems more fitting for like little guys like us, and even bigger guys like where Edith is, relative to us. We're a small bank, but there's definitely an opportunity that we see here in the state of Michigan, to grow, help those businesses grow, and it fits what we're able to do. I do think that more and more banks are going to come online, and credit unions, as the regulations, the Safe Banking Act, some other things start to come into play here. But it's a tough road. There's some public news stories about some credit unions and banks that didn't really uh, do things right, so they've been shut down already. So massive amount of compliance and requirements to make and regulations to make sure that you have a program and procedures that are above board to do cannabis banking. But that's why we spent the last 12 months working on it before we went live. And I feel like we have a good program, so we're not going to hopefully follow in the footsteps of some of those other institutions that made mistakes. But
Yeah.
it'll continue to grow.
No, for sure. Thank you. So a lot of times in the industry, of course, I work with dispensaries. I work with dispensary owners, managers who build my software. So a lot of times what I hear is the complaints from them. They're like, oh, well, banks don't want to bank with us, evil banks, so on and so forth. But really, when you look at it from the flip side, there's so much risk for the bank to actually get in business with you. We saw this credit union trying, however, they did not have the or procedures in place to actually make that happen successfully. They were dinged, and now, like you said, that happened. It's all over the news, and that's not good for their business, right? So then, Becky, the question I have for you, while we get Edith working here, what kind of mistakes do you see banks? I guess what mistakes do you see banks having in their program? So like when a bank goes live with a cannabis program, what kind of mistakes do you see them making actually?
Right. Well, I see more banks doing it well than
Oh, nice.
banks not doing it well. Because the thing is, banks, and this is why, the safe banking bill is important, and because most people want banks to do what they do best, which what we do best is help prevent money laundering. And so banks do that every day. And so, and that's their number one goal with the cannabis industry, is to prevent money laundering. That's what we are tasked with. And so banks know how to do that. It's just a different industry that banks have to learn on how to do that. And it's always going to be high risk. So there's not going to be a whole bunch of banks just jumping into it. But one of the biggest flaws in a program is not giving people like Aaron the adequate support with from their board, from their executive management, to allow someone like Aaron to make quick decisions on hiring or implementing the program. Or Aaron, I don't know if you're manually running your program or if you have some technology that's supporting you. One of the banks that most recently got some negative orders from their examiners were using a technology piece. So technology isn't the solution. It's really a staffing solution. So you still have to know how to run your program manually, but technology can help with doing it well. So I think that's kind of my biggest things I've seen, is where the person in charge of the program may not have full support of the board or their executive management. And that's definitely what needs to come into play. And then that was the one I saw. And then, cross training. So there's other people in the bank that are BSA AML specialists that may not be a part of the actual cannabis program. But if you cross train them to know how to do it as well, because what I'm also seeing is the banks that are now dipping their toe into it are poaching the BSA AML people that have the experience. Like I think Aaron was just poached recently. So, I think that, so cross-training your staff to make sure that you have backup plans, because I've seen two banks, one was in hemp only, and the other one was doing THC deposit relationships, and they had to close their complete program down because they lost their Aaron. So, making sure that you've got cross-training, I think is important.
Yeah, for sure. something that I want to also touch on, which is staffing. So, Aaron, you just started your cannabis banking program, meaning you can now accept cannabis businesses to bank with you. So, what types of roles for this program?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Louis. And first of all, I completely agree with everything Becky just said. At Bank Michigan, we hired a third-party consulting company. Becky may have heard of Shield Compliance and DX Consulting. Um, and we started with them early last year. Some of the banks that are getting into the industry are thinking they can go it alone and just taking, like Becky said, taking some of their existing BSA officers or financial analysts and plugging them right into this world of cannabis. And it's really not the best way to go about it. So I feel like we were pretty smart. Hopefully we're one of those banks that, gets on the right track with our compliance and regulations because we brought in this third party expertise, if you will. To answer your question, Louis, we were in fact already set budget because we have a certain expectation for our growth this year. We're looking for BSA officers. We're looking for financial analysts. I would call those kind of on the back end. They're kind of, making sure that the compliance and all the regulations are, being properly calculated. And on the front end, salespeople, right? Bankers. You definitely need to know the banking side to be in cannabis banking. A little bit of cannabis knowledge doesn't hurt. We're finding that we can get folks up to speed more on the cannabis side than we can on the banking side, right? So having that banking experience right now is a huge asset. However, we're a small bank and we believe in crawling before we can walk and walking before we run. So we're open to people that are interested in getting into the sales side. We actually have a progressional system where they might start as a BSA officer or junior officer, kind of learning the back of the house and all the things that are required there, and then essentially working their way up to their in front of customers.
So then that ties into my follow-up question. So let's say I just graduated from university out here with a finance degree, and I'm involved with your bank through the cannabis program. Do you or would you require cannabis experience in order to work in your bank in that program or not?
Two ways to answer that question. My philosophy in banking for the last 26 years has always been I'd rather take someone who has the right coachable skills or mindset, and I can train anybody if they have the right buy-in and drive. And certainly, though, to answer your question, someone with a college education, maybe a background in sales and or banking, or in the other direction, good analytical skills for the BSA officers would also be a plus.
Gotcha. So not necessary that they have the cannabis experience, but it would be nice just the banking finance background is what's most important.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing about cannabis for the give or take 10 or so banks in Michigan that are doing it right and credit unions that are doing it right now, to the door into banking, right? In all opportunities and all segments of banking. We had one person that kind of came early in our program last year and moved up into a leadership role on the BSA side. So that's a good thing.
It is.
So now it's just not cannabis. Now that individual, she is also, doing BSA duties for the entire bank.
So that's that cross training Becky
Yep.
was talking about before. Yeah, that's awesome. Glad to see you're aligned. So then, Becky, next question is for you. Let's see if we have Edith. Edith, actually, can you hear us okay, or could you try to unmute yourself? Oh, still can't hear you, unfortunately. I'm so sorry about that.
It looked like she was just unmuted a minute ago.
Okay. Now
There
am
you
I
are.
okay?
Yay! Wonderful.
I took Aaron's advice and switched over to Edge as well, and that fixed it, evidently.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So yeah, let's have you introduce yourself if you don't mind, just where you are,
Okay.
what you do. Yeah.
Okay. I am Edith Farrell, and I am a vice president of Union Bank and a risk officer. We have been banking the cannabis industry since January of 2019. I was the person in charge of putting the program together, the team together, and continue We have customers pretty much all over the state of Michigan. We've got a few in the UP and pretty much every corner and everywhere in the Lower Peninsula. And have a team of 4 that works on the program now. So we've grown from, started with me to a half a person to up to 4 now.
Awesome. Yeah. So I asked this question earlier. I kind of want to get some insight from you. So what were the determining factors, if you don't mind sharing, if that's okay, for you to actually bank cannabis? Because I know a lot of banks aren't doing it now. So what caused that change? Yeah.
We looked at it for about 9 months before we decided to jump in. It was basically education and understanding. We did, it's a new industry, so we understanding of the industry and needed to take the time to learn that, as well as the fuzzy guidelines of how to do it. There's not, at this point, there's not cast in stone, this is what you do, everything other than like doing CTRs and SARs. The rest of it's kind of, there's good best case guidelines out there, but not good rules yet until we do get something with the Safe Banking Act. So it was kind of getting ourselves, our bank and board comfortable with what would be required to safely bank the industry. We needed to put software in place so that we could monitor and connect into the metric system and all of that. And then the big issue that I feel for banks is getting around the reputation risk. I mean, our worst case scenario is that Channel 8 News is going to be out front of our little town bank at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday. That is not something that we want. But in the first year, we were pretty quiet with it. We didn't do any advertising, pretty much kept it quiet on my end as well. But then 2019 was also a growing year for the industry. Changes with MRA and getting all of the emergency rules and guidelines and the adult use up and running. After that first year, we were much more comfortable with it. We did, all of our shareholders, we announced that based on recommendation from our attorneys to make sure our shareholders all knew about it. And we did that. And then after that point, then really started coming out, and we've done some advertising. I mean, we're not doing billboards or anything like that, but we do, some selective advertising. We've put some different things that I've done on Facebook as well as LinkedIn. And so we've, got that pushed out there. And so it's, that's the biggest thing I think, is that a lot of concern of how traditional bank customers and shareholders are going to look at it, just because of the stigma that's still there.
Yeah, there's still a stigma around it, whether or not you believe it. Sometimes you spend a lot of time in cannabis, you kind of forget that it's still seen as something that was, bad for such a long time. So that's a very, very important point. And I just want to touch back on Becky. You just was wondering, since you work with multiple banks, and there may be some cannabis operators in the room. So just wondering if you could tell us about a time, if this has already happened, if you've seen it, where a bank stopped working with the cannabis business, and like what caused that? Do you have any stories?
I think Edith and Aaron can also speak to this as well. And it's basically not following the rules that the bank has set in place. Like the main thing around that I see the biggest issue is just documentation. The bank needs certain documents at certain times, and it's not to make the customer's life hard. It's because they're going to have regulators in their bank, and they need to have the documentation, and they need to have the documentation at a certain time. And so, so that's been the one bank I was, my client that I was in the bank yesterday, they had to terminate a relationship that they didn't want to, but they just were not getting their documents to them and didn't even really have a timeline. So they're like, well, we're going to have to terminate the relationship because we can't have a weakness in this program. So that was one thing. Another thing was the other one that they had, the customer simply lost their license. They weren't following the government guidance, the state provided guidance. And so they lost their license. Therefore, they had to terminate that relationship as well.
Because essentially they would then be just working with an illegal business at that point, right?
Right. Yeah. Then it goes to your legal compliant customer. All of a sudden now is considered illicit.
No, that makes sense. And unfortunately, we're at time and we do have to wrap it up. However, just one last question for the folks in the audience is, so starting with Edith, how do you keep up with your cannabis news? How do you learn about cannabis and what's going on? What are the methods that you use?
You read a lot. I think I've got 6 or 7 daily news feeds that I get. You're on MRA's website all of the time. Social media. You in the banking, at least right now. I mean, I live and breathe this all the time. I go to bed at night on Facebook, looking at what's happening, or trying to keep up with customers and all of that. And it's just constant because it changes so quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And likewise, so this industry is really just fast moving. You have to keep up with it. If not, you just get left behind. So likewise. And so, Aaron, how do you keep up with your news and what's happening?
Like Edith and I are on the exact same page. There's so much social media out there, the MICIA, Facebook groups, and I'm constantly reading to keep myself up to date. And whether it's a small chat group or discussion, events like this, there's certain politicians that are more involved in the state of Michigan, talking with them, you name it. Just it's part of banking is to be social and into the community. So whatever our focus is in banking, if it happens to be cannabis, we're in that community. And that's what we do.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And lastly, how about you, Becky? How do you keep up with the news?
Yeah, we're aligned. Yes, reading emails. I've got 20 plus years banking experience. I was a commercial lender, and to think that I start my mornings sipping my cup of coffee, reading Marijuana Moment is just kind of fascinating to me. This is cool, and just because when you're talking to someone in the cannabis industry, you use certain terms and don't use certain terms for specific reasons. And then when you're talking to, your BSA officer or your CEO of a bank, there's certain terms that you need to use that are, kind of in violation of what the industry, likes to say, doesn't say. So just knowing those nuances and what is really very fascinating to me. And I love just tracking the legislation, what's going through the states, what's going through the United States, what has, you see these bills being introduced and you're like, well, unfortunately that doesn't have a chance, but I'd like to see, so I like to see the research going on and the bills that are being passed there. Because for like what we talked about with reputational risk, when you can get some research and some education around what this plant really is and the solutions it really has, I think that can help the people that, the 10% of the Americans that are still like against it. I think getting some education out there would be a game changer.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm always tuning in to your videos on LinkedIn about what's going on. So I really appreciate it.
Those are fun. Those are fun.
They are. So, yep. So we're at time, like I said before, and we didn't get the chance to speak with everyone as long as we wanted to. However, I would ask our panelists to possibly go over to the networking section of the app so you can meet some of the folks that are on this panel, maybe have a conversation, get a chance to answer some questions and connect. And so also people in the chat, go ahead and connect with our panelists in the networking area if you can. It's been a pleasure, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
See y'all. Bye.